All right, welcome again. We are still waiting on our third presenter, but we'll start the session. My name is Ravina Jain, and I'm with Gresham Smith, where I work as a part of traffic team. I'm excited to be moderating this session, and I appreciate you all being here. Before we begin the session, just a quick note: we'll have all the presentation first, and then we'll open the floor for Q&A session at the end. So please hold your questions until then. Just a quick thing, this session will provide an insight on FHWA grant pursuits, recent developments, lesson learned, and the implementation of key initiative to enhance road safety and infrastructure. Now to kick things off, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Megha Young. Megha Young, AICP, has 20 years of experience in regional, municipal, and statewide transportation planning. As a senior planner at Gresham Smith, she has managed a variety of studies, including safety, freight, resiliency, bicycle, pedestrian, and community planning. Megha is a graduate of Georgia Institute of Technology, where she received a Master of City and Regional Planning and Bachelor of Science in Earth and Atmospheric Sciences. Megha serves as the Vice President of Chapter Services for the Georgia Planning Association. Please join me in welcoming Megha.
Great. Thank you, Ravina. Good morning, everyone. All right. Today I'm going to talk about a few things related to the Sandy Springs Safety Action Plan. So I'm going to give you an overview of the project, a little bit of information about Sandy Springs in case you're unfamiliar with the city. We're going to talk about the crash analysis. So I'll go into some of the details of how we identified where the safety issues were and the different types of analyses that we did. We'll talk a little bit about community feedback and how that had an impact on the outcomes of the plan. And then I'll also discuss briefly the implementation plan or the outcomes. So Sandy Springs, in case you're unfamiliar, is located just north of Atlanta. It's traversed by both Georgia 400 and 285, which carry a lot of traffic through the city. There are a little over 107,000 residents, and it's been steadily growing since the city was incorporated formally in 2005. It's a relatively affluent and well-educated community. 70% of residents have a bachelor's degree or higher, or those age 25 and above. Median household income is over $100,000. It's the third largest city in Metro Atlanta, and then the eighth largest city in Georgia. There's all kinds of things that draw people to Sandy Springs. Part of the city lies in the perimeter center area, which is a hub for office and retail and housing. Over 29 million square feet of office space in perimeter center. That picture on the top right shows City Springs, which is a development that has their city hall, a performing arts center, mixed-use development, town green. So there are people there all the time. There are several neighborhoods, both owner-occupied and renter-occupied households, and also a variety of retail and dining destinations in the city. So a lot of reasons for people to be there. That picture on the left shows the Chattahoochee River, which is right in the city's backyard. You also have the recreational area associated with the river. So again, a lot of people going through the city, coming into the city, going out, and just kind of underscoring the need to make sure that everyone can get around safely. So the Sandy Springs Safety Action Plan was funded through FHWA's Safe Streets for All program with a local match from the city. The overarching goal is to reduce and eventually eliminate fatalities and serious injuries on roadways in the city. And really, this plan reflects Sandy Springs' ongoing commitment to safety. So they've already done a number of different plans and projects with a safety focus. And this is kind of a way to take all of those and really make an action plan moving forward. The plan was developed on the safe system approach. If any of you were in the session yesterday with Mark Doctor, he talked a little bit about this, but basically it acknowledges that crashes are inevitable, but that they don't have to result in a fatality or a serious injury. And it really takes a multi-layered approach to crash prevention and acknowledges that it's a shared responsibility among all partners. So here's the major tasks that we undertook as part of the safety action plan. We did develop a comprehensive crash database to help identify high crash locations and safety needs. From that, we identified a high injury network where the most severe crashes occur. We established a safety framework and goals to help achieve a reduction in those more serious crashes. We also did a demographic analysis to try to identify communities that might be disproportionately affected by these crashes. And then we came up with a program of projects and strategies to help achieve safety targets, and ultimately have documented that in a safety action plan that the city can use going forward. So I'll touch on some of the aspects of the crash analysis. We did conduct a pretty robust crash analysis as part of this plan. It was really a data-driven project. So we looked at crash trends and patterns over time. We developed that high injury network and high injury intersections to identify where the worst issues are. We looked at overrepresented crash types. We wanted to know what are causing all of these crashes. We did compare Sandy Springs to peer cities in the area, as well as a region in the state, to kind of see how the city stacks up versus those other areas. We look at systemic risk factors. So what are the underlying issues in the transportation and land use network that might be contributing to these crashes? And then finally, we looked at who's being impacted and who is involved in these crashes through our demographic analysis. So between 2018 and 2022, which was our period of analysis, there were over 27,500 crashes in Sandy Springs. That does include interstates and expressways. And if you can see this map, you start to see hot spots in certain areas. So along Georgia 400, along 285, and really at those interchanges. And then also on Roswell Road or State Route 9, which is the main north-south arterial through the city. About half of the crashes occurred on city streets and state arterials, and the other half were on 400 and 285. So for this plan, we are focusing primarily on fatal and serious injury crashes because those are those life-altering events, also referred to as K&A crashes sometimes. There were a total of 38 fatal crashes and over 200 crashes that resulted in at least one serious injury between 2018 and 2022. About a third were on city-owned streets and about 16% were on Roswell Road. And when we look back at trends over the past 10 years, aside from a dip during the pandemic, there has been a steady rise in fatal and serious injury crashes in the city. Between 2013 and 2023, there was a 50% increase in crashes during that time period. So with the high injury network and high injury intersections, really the point of that was to highlight where the greatest safety issues were. So we delineated the transportation network into segments and intersections and basically assigned crashes to each of those areas. And rather than just looking at the simple total of crashes, we calculated the cost of those crashes based on some figures from GDOT. So you can see in this red box here, that's $12.5 million for fatal injury crashes, $2.7 million for suspected injury crashes, and all the way down to $28,000 for crashes that involve property damage only. We then normalize the crash cost for each segment or intersection based on traffic volume. So we looked at AADT and came up with crashes per million vehicle miles traveled or million entering vehicles for intersections. So the segments and the intersections with the highest crash costs or crash rates, I should say, basically became the high injury network and our series of high injury intersections. I know it's a little bit hard to see the map here, but Roswell Road is highlighted, which makes sense given the frequency of crashes on that road. But since we're also accounting for severity, you see other places pop up. So if you kind of see where the bright red is, that includes the Northside Drive interchange with 285. There's some one-way pairs there where there have been a history of head-on collisions. And then you also start to see portions of other collector roads and even roads in residential areas. And that's the kind of information we're really trying to draw out from this analysis. We also looked at overrepresented crash types or contributors and factors that were the most prevalent in fatal and serious injury crashes. So these are the overrepresented crash types in Sandy Springs. You see single vehicle crashes, crashes involving pedestrians and motorcycles. And then you also see some behaviors start to emerge: aggressive driving, distracted driving, impaired driving. Does anyone have a guess as to what the most overrepresented type is? Yeah, actually, very good. Yes, it was distracted driving. So distracted driving counts for 41% of all fatal and serious injury crashes and over half of all crashes in the city. And you can see some of these other figures showing that these factors really are contributing disproportionately to the most severe crashes in the city. We also did a deeper dive to try to understand some behaviors and conditions that were associated with these overrepresented crash types. So we saw single vehicle crashes often involve distracted drivers, occur in dark conditions, and impact vulnerable roadway users or pedestrians and cyclists. Pedestrian crashes are often the result of distracted driving, occur in dark and unlit conditions and near intersections. Aggressive driving crashes often involve speeding and result in a vehicle leaving the roadway and occur during the early morning hours. Motorcycle crashes often happen near intersections and involve left angle collisions. Distracted driving crashes are often rear ends and happen near intersections and between 9 a.m. and noon. Then impaired driving crashes typically occur on the weekend in dark conditions and often involve just one vehicle. Here's some findings from a systemic risk analysis that we did, where we tried to find some common factors in the transportation and land use network that might have a correlation to fatal and serious injury crashes. So no big surprise, expressways, interstates, and roads with higher speed limits are common factors for many of those. It is notable, though, that less than 5% of KA crashes occurred on roads with a speed limit of 25 to 30 miles per hour. But when you jump up to roads with a speed limit of 35 miles per hour, those account for almost a third of those fatal and serious injury crashes. We also found, alarmingly, that a lot of these, the worst crashes are happening near schools and near parks, in commercial and mixed use areas where you kind of have a concentration of a lot of activity. And also when there's sidewalk on only one side of the street. Again, just really underscoring the need to provide complete multimodal facilities for the most vulnerable users. I'll touch a little bit now on community engagement. So we did try to speak to as many groups as possible and use a variety of platforms to try to reach people. We had a safety task force, which was comprised of a variety of different city departments. We held 7 different focus groups that included everyone from the business community to regional transportation partners, school leadership, bike, ped, and transit advocates, all kinds of stakeholders. We held pop-up events in the city, which were well attended. You can see that picture on the left. We invited people to put a dot on a map where they saw safety issues, and they also participated in a jar and marble exercise where they got to prioritize their dollars, basically allocate dollars for what types of safety improvements they would like to see in the city. And we also did have some traditional open houses and did an online map survey. So we issued the map survey through a platform called Social Pinpoint, where basically it's a website and you can drop a pin and say, you know, this is what my safety issue is. And this was really valuable because we heard a lot of things that data doesn't always show you. Some of the comments here were that posted speed limit on this road is 35, but drivers frequently far exceed that. People run this four-way stop intersection. And then a comment here that vehicles speed up to 50 miles per hour using the turn lanes to pass traffic. So, you know, not always easy to directly draw a correlation between what they're saying and necessarily program and safety project, but you know, broadly, it's just a good way for the city to kind of get a sense of what's going on outside of the crash data. Messaging was also a really important part of this effort. We did help the city develop social media campaigns to get people involved in the plan. So there's a couple of examples here where it has some pictures of actual crashes and some kind of hard-hitting statistics about how many crashes involve distracted driving, the increase in the number of fatal and serious injury crashes over the past several years. And at the bottom, there's kind of a call to action. It says you can be a part of the solution and invites people to go to the website. And really, throughout this planning process, the city was really good about emphasizing that roadway safety is a shared responsibility. Quote here from Kristen Westcott, Transportation Unit Manager at the city, that she said at the open houses, we also had collateral with this, but it says that reducing and ultimately eliminating fatal and serious injury crashes is a shared responsibility. And beyond infrastructure solutions, we all have a responsibility to adopt behavioral changes to improve safety outcomes. In other words, safety starts with you. So kind of just a good reminder to us all that we all have a responsibility for roadway safety. The implementation plan was done also as part of this project to kind of come up with the projects and strategies going forward. So it's built around the 6 E's framework. So not just engineering solutions, but looking really holistically at strategies revolving around education, encouragement, enforcement, evaluation, emergency response. Here's some of the example strategies that were developed for the plan. So participating in national safety campaigns like Click It or Ticket or drunk driving campaigns you often see around 4th of July or other holidays. The city may put out message boards to encourage safe driving. So that's a resource they already have that they can utilize. Expanding child safety seat inspections, which the fire department already does. Allocating additional funding to traffic enforcement efforts. So I will say we met with Sandy Springs Police Department a number of times, and they are very proactive and serious about traffic safety, but the fact is there are limited resources, and I think most jurisdictions probably are in that same boat. So this is kind of a call for the city council to consider allocating additional funding to hire more police officers so they can expand their traffic safety enforcement. Collecting bicycle and pedestrian accounts. So really trying to get a better sense of, you know, where are people using bicycles, where are they walking, just to make sure that we're prioritizing infrastructure and crossings where those users are. Conducting before and after safety studies. So like I mentioned, the city's already done a number of safety-minded transportation projects. And as those get a few years down the road, they're very interested in kind of taking a look back to see if there are fewer crashes than there were before, or if there's anything they should do different going forward. And a couple of ideas around utilizing AI for near-miss crashes, and then conducting some pilots for leading pedestrian intervals. This is a map representing the projects that were developed for the safety action plan. So like I mentioned, the city has done a number of studies already and has some planned safety projects. So we basically looked at the high entry network and high entry intersections and said, well, is there a planned project that already addresses the safety need? And if not, then, you know, we came up with a safety project, or we kind of added some additional information to those planned projects to make sure that safety was being addressed, that the crash trends specifically that we saw were being addressed. So you see the lines and dots there. We have short, midterm, and long-term projects, and they were really, we really focused on FHWA's proven safety countermeasures, making sure we're utilizing best practices as far as the different types of solutions to address safety needs. And finally, these were the goals that were developed for the plan. So there were Vision Zero goals, as well as goals for how the city wants to invest in safety. So for city-owned streets, the goal is to have no fatal or serious injury crashes by 2050. And then for state routes, for interstates and expressways, the goal is to work with GDOT to achieve a 5% annual reduction in fatal and serious injury crashes. As far as safety investments, the city wants to allocate 50% of all transportation dollars to safety improvements, 30% of all transportation safety investments to underserved communities. And they also want to establish a timeline for access management improvements on Roswell Road. The city does have a concept for Roswell Road that involves replacing the center two-way left turn lane with a median and strategically placed R-cuts. So acknowledging it's really a source of a lot of the safety issues in the city. The staff really wanted to establish a timeline for doing that project, understanding that it's going to be an expensive undertaking and will take a while to do. This is what the Vision Zero goal looks like for the city-owned streets. So to achieve the zero fatalities and serious injuries, it requires a reduction of basically one fatal or serious injury crash every 2 years, roughly. And this is a graphic depicting the 5% annual reduction on state routes. I know it's a little hard to see, but that last year is 2065 and we're still not at zero. So I think this one is going to be harder to attain and maybe not even in my lifetime, but definitely something the city still wants to work with GDOT to try to achieve. So here's my contact information and also contact information for David Lowe, who is a city project manager. Thank you.
Thank you, Megha, for that insightful presentation and also providing an overview of the planning process, how the problems city of Sandy Spring is facing and the city's path moving forward. Now, moving on to our next speaker, we have Byron Rushing from Tool Design. Byron Rushing, he is a senior planner at Tool Design Group. He focuses on transportation planning, active transportation safety, greenway trails, and livable communities. Prior to joining Tool, he was the walking and bicycling program manager at the Atlanta Regional Commission and statewide bicycle and pedestrian coordinator at the Georgia DOT. He has degrees from Vanderbilt University and Georgia Tech. Let's welcome Byron Rush.
Wonderful. Thank you. Good morning. I hate doing the thing, but I'm going to do it because I need some little bit of energy this morning for pulling it off the interstate just now. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all. Appreciate it. And just to clarify, Ravina, are we going to do questions during the presentation or afterwards? Afterwards. Okay, great. I am glad we're going to do questions afterwards. I appreciate a bit of a contrarian presentation, and I realize that I'm a 100% planner at the ITE conference. And so I want to push a couple of things in lessons that we have learned from two cities that we have just completed safety action plans for. One we did late last year and one that we are in the middle of, and it's due to the city in April. So I'm very excited to share some real-time lessons. One of the great things before we get into this about the SS4A program is the money, roughly $5 billion over 5 years-ish, has been coming out so quickly that we've had a lot of time to iterate very quickly. Our firm has launched a safety action plan through SS4A roughly every other month nationally. We have an enormous group inside our company who trades notes. We have a very active teams group, and we get to share lessons. And so it's been really fun to watch these innovative and occasionally provocative plans hit the streets, take slightly similar approaches, but slightly different attacks in each one, and get to talk about what is working amongst communities and what is not. We've learned a lot from that. I would like to say, I'll preview this right now. Two cities are city of Decatur, Georgia, just to the east of Atlanta. One of the real leaders in, we got some claps going on over here. What's that? Decatur's greater. Yeah, that's the sign on the bumper stickers. I'm a Decatur native, so I'm very proud of it. And I also get to sit in the meetings, and a little bit of my teenage self comes out. And I said, you know, I was the one who was walking, biking, skateboarding on those streets when I was a teenager. And I get to revisit and have some conversations about what the city has done well or what they continue to do. The other city is Dunwoody, and we wrapped that up last year. And I would like to thank one of our Dunwoody elected officials who's in the room today, and has been a tremendous supporter of that plan as well as conversations in the city. So Joe Seconder, thank you for being here today. Please report back to the city. Let's see. Okay. I don't know if there's a way to make this big, but I'm not going to worry about it right now. Let's see. Yeah, let's not worry about it. Let's just talk. Very quickly, if anybody's not familiar with SS4A, Safe Streets and Roads for All, one of the federal discretionary programs under the current transportation bill. If we would like to, during questions and answers, talk about SS4A and the future of the program, I am more than happy to do that. There's been a bit of turmoil in the past month with all federal discretionary funding, but in particular hitting SS4A and what the current administration views as not in line with their priorities. So we've been adapting and learning. I think one of the big lessons from this conversation is that we are not totally sure what the discretionary decisions are going to look like for the next 2 years. The money will be there, and USDOT is having a vigorous conversation internally. It is congressionally allocated. It will be paid at some point, but I know it's hard for cities who are in the process of signing federal agreements right now and debating when that grant matching is going to arrive, if at all. So if anybody wants to have a more conversation about that, I will stay off my soapbox and we will just talk about the facts that we know on the ground and what we're hearing both from our friends inside USDOT as well as cities who are in the process of signing grant agreements right now. Anybody who has a grant agreement signed, you're good. And the money will get paid. If you have not signed your grant agreement, if you've been given a grant award, our recommendation is to get on that very quickly. I won't go through all of SS4A. Megan did a great job of talking about a little bit of that. We're going to echo some themes that Sandy Springs has seen also. Their short story is there are 8 things you have to do in a safety action plan to be a certified comprehensive safety action plan under SS4A. You have to set a goal. You know, it doesn't say what the goal is, but you have to have a goal. There's different ways to think about that. You have to plan for a safe system. Megan talked about safe system. I'll echo the slide in just a second. You have to have a data-driven safety analysis, or very often what I say is a data-informed safety analysis. My undergraduate degree is in political science. I think politics are deeply important to how we run our society and make decisions amongst diverse groups. And the data does not tell us what to do. It just points us in the right direction. And I think that's very important. And we'll talk about that throughout my presentation. You have to do engagement and collaboration, as every great planning process does. You have to take into consideration equity. This is one of the big things that the current administration is pivoting hard on, and we're trying to figure out what they are going to be looking for certifying equity conversations. And it could be simple as changing the language a little bit. We're starting to use demographics and looking at demographic profile on our plans. But we still have to do some sort of either environmental justice or understanding of vulnerable and overly exposed populations and communities. I'm also, it's not included in this presentation, but our firm is working on the Beaufort Highway Safety Action Plan. And I'll be happy to talk a little bit about that if anybody's interested. The Beaufort Highway Safety Action Plan, where equity is the entire point of the plan, we're having some deep conversations with the city sponsoring that on the best way to work with immigrant communities and reduce exposures for overexposed communities along a very dangerous roadway. It's not slides in the presentation, but just a side conversation. You have to look at policy and process changes. So this is where I'm going to be a little bit provocative to the room of PEs and ITE staffs. We're all friends. We're all here for the same mission. But you have to look at the decisions and the routine actions that your city makes through process, through ordinances, through whether that be a Vision Zero program, a Complete Streets program, some other type of thing. You can't just program projects. And I'd like to touch on that right at the end of my presentation. You do have to look at projects, and you do have to look at strategies for reducing fatal and serious injuries. And you have to do that transparently, which a lot of our clients are doing through dashboards or annual reporting through some sort of report. As I see the SS4A program, there's really kind of four missions embedded within it. The first is to reduce and eliminate fatal and serious injury crashes. And it's very important that we think about the KA crashes, the FSIs, as the life debilitating, life ending, and the ones that are the biggest impact on families and communities. And if we have a choice between a project that reduces many crashes, but of less severity, or a few crashes of greater severity, our firm and our clients steer towards the ones that reduce the most severe crashes. It's rare that we have to make a trade-off between those two things, but when it comes time to either quantify costs or to look towards the most severe crashes based on a functional classification, a road typology, a location within a community, we go for those first and say that it's important to reduce the fatal ones and the serious injury ones, while we also reduce any and all crashes. Mega put it well. I think the speaker yesterday put it well. Some crashes are inevitable, unfortunately, but they should not be severe when they do occur. And we'll think about that. You have to improve the comfort or the perception of safety for people and communities. Near misses or trips not taken or perceptions from the community about what safety means. Safety is both a number as well as a feeling for people. And it impacts, especially for the clients we're working with in these two studies, Decatur and Dunwoody, who have active goals to increase their bike and ped trips. People are not choosing different trips because of the perception of safety. So we want to talk to people about why they feel unsafe, and change the conversation as well. It should also, related to that, support the community's bigger goals. Safety is ultimately the goal of this program, but it's one that I would hope that we all have a chance to stop talking about within a generation. And we want to start talking about things of economic development, of mobility, of sustainability, of other goals the city's trying to achieve. And safety and the safety of streets should not impede the things that cities are trying to do proactively to improve their communities. And then it has to produce a plan that the feds certify, because if you get a certified safety action plan, you are then in line for the next round of implementation funding. So at the end of the day, bare minimum has to be signed off on by Jared Lombard or one of our friends at Georgia Division. Sorry, I don't know any of the South Carolina Division staff, but them as well also. I won't read through all this. Mega touched on this well. The safe system approach, the current paradigm for traffic safety under the National Roadway Safety Strategy. It is a change over historic approaches to traffic safety through doing things like saying we're going to be proactive. We're not going to wait for the last crash to occur. We're not going to wait for a fatality to occur at a location that's known to be dangerous. We're going to be proactive and address locations in advance if possible. It shares responsibility amongst we, the planners, y'all, the engineers, just to pick on y'all in the room. The elected officials certainly have a big role in keeping safety on the radar of the public, and the road users and people have responsibility to act, walk, drive, bike safe as possible. And ultimately, I think at the end of the day, we want redundancy in the system. So if someone even does make a bad decision, they do make a mistake, a casual error or a bad judgment, that crash does not result in a fatality. And there's redundancy in the system, largely through a theme that I'll keep echoing: slower speeds, slower speeds, slower speeds. Higher speeds increase both the likelihood of a crash and certainly the severity if one does occur. All right, I've previewed the two plans, Dunwoody, Georgia, Decatur Safe Streets, City of Decatur plan, which is in progress. I'll be heading back to my desk tonight to continue to working on that one. Dunwoody Road Safety Action Plan, and an interesting side conversation. Dunwoody chose not to use the words Vision Zero. They felt it didn't resonate with their elected officials or community. So we found creative ways around that to talk about the same goal of reducing fatal crashes without the kind of national Vision Zero brand associated with that. Decatur Safe Streets, Decatur does everything, and all of their logos. The logo is very cute. I'm very proud of this one, but it did have to go through like 4 signatures to get it done, but I'm glad we did it because it's a nice branding that they're using for their road safety program moving forward. All right, provocative lesson number 1, and Ravina, you'll keep an eye on time for me, right? Thank you. Okay. Data determines risk and eliminate actions. We have enough data. If anybody's concerned about data, we have enough data. All data are imperfect. Police reports are okay at best. There's a lot of gaps. There's a lot of missing information within them, but we have enough data to make really good decisions. So we want to use the data to get a little bit below the crash reports and start to think strategically about what do we use, what's most important, how do we use that data. We certainly look at trends. Mega talked about trends for Sandy Springs. Dunwoody is going, let's see which one this is. So blue line are all crashes of any severity. So they're going the right way on all crashes. Pretty dramatic reduction in crashes over the 5 years we looked at for this, 17 to 21. We completed in 23, did most of the work in 22 with 21 data. One of the reasons why we have enough data, because you're never going to get this year's data. You're always going to be at least looking at last year's data. We look at 5 years of average and assume that generally every 5 years is pretty typical over the course of decades. We're going to be seeing similar trends. With the dreaded 2020 asterisk in the middle of this, all the crashes went down, a lot of fatalities went up. I'm looking forward to moving out of the 2020 window in the next couple of years and be working with more reasonable non-pandemic data. But it's an interesting counterpoint and caveat in there when we do look at the trends. Unfortunately for Dunwoody, fatal and serious injury crashes have increased slightly over the past couple of years, both from the pandemic year of 2020 and coming out. And the really key number for Dunwoody is 45. So 45 fatal and serious injury crashes during that 5-year window. When I started playing, I called this my headline number. It's really the number we're starting at that we're trying to get to 0. Decatur's remarkably similar. And I've been really glad to work with the two cities kind of back to back. They have great similarities and great differences. Decatur has 47 fatal and serious injury crashes, very similar to Dunwoody, a little bit higher population, but a little bit lower roadway mileage overall in the city, and a really, really important difference about road ownership. But unfortunately for Decatur, both total crashes and fatal and serious injury crashes have increased over the most recent 5 years, including Decatur had 4 pedestrians get hit on one day in November last year. One of them was a fatality. The other 3 were not serious injuries. But it really illuminated for Decatur and their staff and elected officials that all the progress they've made over one of the metro region's leading walkable and bikeable cities can all kind of change on a dime on one kind of dreary rainy day, first Monday after time change, and a few other factors. And it really kind of was the impetus for them doing this work. The interesting thing about Decatur is that none of their fatalities have occurred on city streets in a decade. So Decatur, if anybody's keeping track and being competitive, Decatur has achieved Vision Zero on city streets in the past 5 years. And that one November day where several people were struck, one fatal, none, the other 3 not serious, was an illumination for them that even for all this achievement, that can turn in a day. I'm going to skip through a bunch of data slides so I can get to some key points. The same trend that we see in every city. Most crashes involve cars to cars and cars to objects. So huge pie for that one. But when we look at fatal and serious injury crashes, the numbers broaden out. The fewer fatal and serious motor vehicle crashes proportionally, many more for Dunwoody pedestrians, many more for motorcycles, and thankfully for Dunwoody, no bicycle fatal or serious injury crashes during that 5-year window. Decatur, very similar pattern with a much more dramatic shift. So most crashes involve cars, but fatal and serious injury crashes for Decatur have been very pedestrian heavy. So all 4 fatalities that Decatur's had in the past 10 years on state routes have been pedestrians, or excuse me, 3 pedestrians and 1 motorcyclist. And then much higher bicycle crashes, partly from the higher levels of bicycle traffic that Decatur has, and especially for Decatur, a lot of the bicycle serious crashes have been weekend trips through Decatur, heading out to Stone Mountain with a number of other small daily crashes. So these numbers flip dramatically for Decatur, and it really illuminates for Decatur that when they're talking about traffic safety, it is a question around people outside of cars in particular. One of the very important conclusions when I say we have enough data, if we collaborate 5 years of data and we look at where those crashes occur, functional classification is a wonderful predictor for severity of crashes. For Dunwoody, interstate ramps, there's a couple of them. Collectors, there's a few, and arterials, both major and minor, account for plurality of fatal and serious injury crashes in the city. Very similar trend for Decatur. Decatur does not have very many classified collector streets, and thankfully there haven't been any fatal or serious on the few miles that they do have. They have had a few on local streets, but overwhelmingly on arterials, both major and minor for Decatur. And we'll look at some maps of the city and kind of illuminate why that's the case for each city. Every city has some commonalities, but every city also has some differences. One of the really important points for Dunwoody is that all crashes on city-owned streets, just over 4,600. State-owned streets, just over 700, so dramatically higher on city streets. Fatal and serious injury crashes overwhelmingly on locally owned streets. And our firm uses FSI rate, or the percentage of all crashes resulting in a fatal and serious injury crash, nearly twice the rate for for state-owned roads. So for about a third of the fatal and serious injury crashes, the likelihood, the FSI rate, the likelihood of a crash resulting in a fatal or serious injury is dramatically higher on a state-owned road than a city-owned street. Decatur's a very different pattern. Decatur, as I mentioned, has had no fatalities on city-owned streets in that 5-year window, but they have had over 2/3 of their fatal and serious injury crashes occur on state routes that bisect the city. So this is both a question of policy. As I mentioned, functional classification, higher functional classification predicts higher severity. But it's also a question of policy and who's making decisions, both for how we do design, how we approach the questions of road projects, but also the conversation in politics about who gets to take credit, responsibility, assigned tasks to work on these. So when we come time to look at actions, conversations between the city and the state are very important in every city, but especially so in Decatur, where a lot of the fatal and serious injury crashes are located on state routes. Now, why that's a particularly important number for these two, Dunwoody does not have any state routes that bisect the city. The only couple of state routes that matter, we excluded 141 and I-285 for this. Our firm excludes limited access interstates and all local safety action plans. But we also excluded 141 because of some technicalities around the very edge of the roadway. But for this study, Cotillion Drive is the only state-owned road on the high injury network in Dunwoody. There's another small portion at the other 285 ramp, but Dunwoody really does not have to deal with GDOT in the same way that a lot of other cities do. So it's a fascinating political question and policy question that for Mount Vernon, and I'm just apologies to the elected officials in the room, for Mount Vernon, for Chamblee Dunwoody, for Ashford Dunwoody outside Perimeter Mall, Peachtree, North Peachtree Road. It's all y'all. Y'all own the road. Y'all get to make decisions around it. And Dunwoody is interesting. Dunwoody is a newer city, inherited design decisions from DeKalb County and from GDOT over the past several decades that Dunwoody's now quote unquote responsible for. But when it comes to politics and policies, Dunwoody and the staff get a lot of decision-making authority over what their roads look like and what they choose to do on those at the whims of a lot of kind of North Metro and North DeKalb traffic patterns and some other issues. But this is what the high injury network maps. We build a high injury network map for every project that we do. It's a wonderful tool for focusing priorities and focusing decisions and actions and projects on the roads that account for the highest proportion of fatal and serious injury crashes for the least amount of road mileage. So for us, it's a little bit of a balancing act. We want to try to shrink that high injury network as small as possible and make it as focused as possible while still grabbing at least half the fatal and serious injury crashes. In Dunwoody's case, 85% of the fatal and serious injury crashes located on just under 5%, 9 miles of city roadway. So very interesting map and a wonderful one that when we showed the city staff, they're like, yep, that's where we need to be working. So great one. Here's the high injury network map for City of Decatur. We built another high risk map, a little bit more systemic oriented, proactive map that pairs with this as well too. I chose not to include it to stay focused on similar maps and data. But let's see what 77% of the fatal and serious injury crashes on just under 9% or 9 miles of roadway, 13% of the road mileage in the city. So a wonderful tool for focusing the city's efforts to balance public input and public opinion, which has been a big issue in Decatur. We got a lot of neighborhood street public comments, but when the city staff comes time to prevent fatal and serious injury crashes, they're staying focused on these. I'm going to be moving a little bit quicker. Speaking of the public, we need to ask the public the right question. In a lot of transportation plans, the safety question in the survey will be, do you want safety? Is safety important for you? Overwhelmingly, everybody says yes, of course. They said we do want to be safe. So for a safety action plan, we want to push that a little bit deeper and say, not just do you want to feel safe, do you want your children to feel safe, but where do you feel unsafe now, today, currently? What makes you feel unsafe? And what are you willing to trade for that? And if a project comes in, it suggests a road diet on the high injury network, and we anticipate great safety benefits. Is the public okay with that, or are the city elected officials and staff going to be in for a fight in the future? So we really want to understand that, and we want to keep public input as qualitative data to match the quantitative data that we see in the crash reports in the high injury network. Decatur had overwhelmingly great responses. We used Social Pinpoint also as well. Over 1,000 comments from, it ended up being just shy of 400 unique commenters and an entire pile of data that we had to sort through. As I mentioned, largely aligned with the Hydro network, but not always. And those roads that are missing from that are on one map but not the other, I built a little 4-quadrant graph of easy political wins, hard political wins, and places that we should be looking for further conversations. That's been very illustrative and instructive for this plan. Dunwoody, similarly, we didn't have quite that number of respondents, but we did have a robust survey open for over 6 months. And the interesting thing here is lack of sidewalks and poor conditions of sidewalks is overwhelmingly the highest, followed by street design that encourages speeding. So thank you, 5 minutes. So a really good conversation from the city and the residents about what they were looking for. Finally, my last, I think maybe, I don't know if it's a provocative lesson or not, but what is a plan? What is it trying to do? What is the point of these safety action plans? They are not comprehensive transportation plans. If anybody in Metro Atlanta, where I do a lot of my work, a county or a city has received comprehensive transportation plan funding, a CTP funding, that is a different document for a slightly different purpose. The safety action plan can program projects. It can suggest places on the Hydro network that we need to put specific safety funding and transportation funding, but it cannot answer the bigger questions about regional traffic demand, access, level of service, economic development, and kind of aspirational visions for the roadway network. Those are all bigger things that are better dealt with in bigger conversations. Safety action plans, I think, especially when they're kind of out of alignment with a CTP, sit here as a bit of an auxiliary plan that's making some sort of comment on the transportation program. It's interesting to hear you say that y'all looked at currently programmed projects, because we have had clients tell us, do not look at my currently programmed projects. They are in PDP, they're underway. We don't have the ability, time, or effort to change something in that. And if you call that out, we're going to be in a tough spot. We've had other clients who said, do not build us a project list because we don't have a dedicated safety pot of money, and we don't want to have a project list floating around for months or years or a decade, and have residents say, wait, whatever happened to that pet hybrid beacon that we were expecting when we don't have the money for it? So there are other clients who say, absolutely, please tell us our top 10 or top 20 Hydro network locations and give us some recommendations, get into a suggestion of what a project might be, and we'll find a way to pay for those. But safety action plans at their best inform the upcoming safety decisions the city's going to be making. And this is all dependent upon client, what they're trying to achieve, what they're trying to do, where the safety action plan falls in their community. But at its best, it should inform routine daily decisions, support program staffing, support program funding, give elected officials the information they need to make comments, give the city information they need to have conversation with the GDOT. But at the end of the day, highlight the risks that are in the city and in the system that they need to be looking for, maybe in a project that they're programming, or maybe in a project that they don't know yet, they haven't identified yet. But when they do approach it, they know that reducing speeding, providing facilities for vulnerable road users, mitigating complicated left turns at large intersections, all of these things are risks they see in their system, and we need to have a system in place for making decisions. It's a little bit uncomfortable. It does not provide the security blanket of a big, giant, comprehensive list where everybody has put in their comments, and they might not be first tier, they might not be second tier, they might be third tier, which we can say if third tier is ever going to get funded or not, but at least somebody sees their name on the list. There's a way that safety action plans live that are a little bit vaguer, but they provide a tremendous amount of information for building a consensus, consolidating conversations, and giving staff and elected officials and the community a common ground to work from, even if that project is not totally identified. That being said, we do want to interject great design tools into the process. Megan mentioned the proven safety countermeasures, a wonderful, if occasionally somewhat shallow bench of tools to draw from. We also don't want to republish the AASHTO Green Book or the AASHTO Bike Guide, published this year authored by Tool Design Group, or the NACTO Urban Bikeways Guide, or publish a whole new entire design. We want to find a way to connect the risks that we see in the system to a set of really good tools that citizens and staff and officials can get behind. Hoboken, New Jersey, the city to first achieve Vision Zero in the United States, kind of officially and formally at the national conversation, did it through picking one tool, daylighting intersections, removing a parking space or two from they have a lot of right angle intersections, a lot of right angle crashes. So they made sure there was no parking space within 20 feet of every intersection. That's not the end all be all they can do, but it's where they saw the most crashes. They grabbed one tool and they said, we're going to be doing this routinely. we're going to have fewer conversations on every single project while we do all of these and do other projects at the same time. So there's an ability to focus and grab the tools that you really need to respond to it, and not worry about the entire design of every single project ever, but have a set of routine tools that you're using routinely. Dunwoody do this to great effect outside the park, it's on Peeler Road. What's the name of the park? Brook Run Park, right? So finding a road that was had a few pedestrian crashes, none fatal or serious, thankfully, but it was a high demand route, and grabbing a few set of really well proven tools and building projects routinely, very small, light touch with city funds, and it's been great. Decatur's doing something similar, but they asked me not to show them because they haven't vetted them with their commission yet. So these are my lessons. That's Elizabeth Shin standing next to a sign that's too big in the city of Decatur. And I'll be happy to answer any questions when we get to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Byron, for the interesting presentation. Now, moving on to our last presentation of this session, I would like to invite Rob Del Ross. Rob is currently an engineering project manager with City of Milton in the Public Works Department. Milton is a city of approximately 45,000 residents in North Fulton County, bordered by Alpharetta, Roswell, Cherokee County, and Forsyth County. Milton was incorporated in 2006 and is named after Revolutionary War hero John Milton, who was also the namesake of the former Milton County. Milton is known for its high quality of life and preserving its rural heritage. Rob has worked with Milton for just over 3 years and has 17 years of experience in local government focusing on engineering and project delivery. Rob is a longtime member and former president of GA section of American Society of Highway Engineers. In his free time, he enjoys cheering for his alma mater, the Yellow Jackets, as well as going on cruises with his wife, Teresa, and playing poker. Let's welcome Rob.
Good morning, everyone. I have a lot of slides that I'm going to talk pretty fast. I'm warning you right now. I want to get you out on time. And there is a little bit of overlap you'll see between the three presenters. So things that you've already heard, I'm going to skip. Appreciate being able to talk to you this morning. Quick agenda for what we're talking about. My first major slide is a big disclaimer. I don't know if we have any federal highway employees in the room. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. I am not a federal highway employee. So if you hear me say something that conflicts with other guidance you've already received, they're likely right and I'm likely wrong. Second disclaimer is we just had an election in November. You're going to be hearing later in my presentation about the implications of that. I'm going to try my best to talk politics and talk about things that are directly affecting us as engineers without being political. As my opinion as engineers, we shouldn't be on the red side. We shouldn't be on the blue side. We should be on the side of the data and preventing people from dying on our roads. Background of Milton, Ravina just covered a little bit of this. We're pretty unique in Milton. You'll see when we start talking about our local road safety plan, what types of issues we're having that residents brought to us and that we're seeing from the data side. We're very, not necessarily diverse from a race perspective, but diverse from a what's going on in our city. We have two relatively high commercial areas in the Crabapple area and then near the Windward Parkway, State Route 9, Alpharetta area. But once you get outside those two commercial nodes, you'll see a lot of farms. You'll see a lot of windy, hilly, primarily two-lane roads, very high speeds, very few driveways. Still, people move to Milton that enjoy that same type of atmosphere that you would typically get in unincorporated Cherokee or unincorporated Forsyth, not necessarily Roswell or Alpharetta. We have. In fact, at the end, we have over, believe it or not, over 200 active horse farms in a incorporated city in the Metro Atlanta, which is kind of shocking. 200 plus horse farms compared to 54 full-time staff outside public safety. Brief, safe streets for all information. If any of you heard my summit, transportation summit presentation, you've seen this slide before. But this has been 3 years of a program where Federal Highway has been directly giving money to cities and counties that never happened at all, ever before year one of this program. So year one, you see a lot of the applicants on the right that got money primarily for year one because the rules were just being set. A lot of the governments that received this funding were using it to develop their safety action plan. And then year two was predominantly the same. Year two is about $900 million nationwide. You see the Georgia recipients on the left, 20 planning grants, and all 20 of those governments were working on their safety action plans. Year three began to change. So going into year three, you had some cities and counties across the state that actually had their safety action plans in place, adopted, vetted by their elected officials, that then allowed them to start going after the bigger pot of money. The more difficult one, the more competitive one is the implementation grants, actually getting construction dollars to do some of the things that were in your plan. So you'll see on the screen, Georgia was competed very well nationwide. If you look at the disbursement of how implementation funding was given to the states, we had 4 projects that won, which was rare and a good sign for what we're doing in Georgia. You'll see the types of projects on the screen. I don't want to read them, but going through that, you'll realize that all 4 of them definitely had a pedestrian bike component to it. That's important for us as local government officials because, well, we'll talk about this a little bit later. When you're writing a grant, when you're going after discretionary grant funding, when you're asking the federal government to fund something that you want to do as a local initiative, the best thing you can do to get a positive response and get a acceptance and start using their money is to give them something that they've already funded before. And by any means, using previously awarded projects, previously awarded scopes, things that you know, they looked at this proposal and said, yes, that's a good use for federal money. If you're able to take those ideas, apply them to your own cities and counties, you've got a very strong case for your projects to get funding. Year 4 is going to be a little bit different. How different, we don't know yet. The NOFO, another acronym many of you probably haven't heard, NOFO's Notice of Funding Opportunity. This is the document that every federal agency in federal government uses. It's an official document to explain exactly what the terms and the criteria are for their discretionary grant program. It gives you the deadlines. It gives you how your projects are going to be scored. It gives you, from the federal perspective, what types of projects are they wanting to receive. That by law, by the bipartisan infrastructure law, that is required to be released before March 30th of this year, which is 20-something days from now. I will not be shocked if they don't meet that deadline. You'll hear a little bit more about why later. There are a lot of things going on the federal government side for those of you who are paying attention. And year 4, Rob's prediction, year 4 is going to be significantly different than years 1 through 3. Unfortunately, we don't know exactly how yet, but by reading the tea leaves, by reading things that the administration are putting out and answering other questions, we can start to try and predict what those new rules will be. But it's very much going to be year 4 different than years 1, 2, or 3. You're not going to be able to assume year 3 implementation money grant was funded for a complete street in Alabama. So if I propose a complete street in year 4 in Georgia, common sense wise, you would think that would be reviewed pretty well and score fairly heavily. But based on what you're seeing in the NOFO, they may not be exactly 1 for 1. There may be a shift in priority. There may be a shift in criteria. There could be criteria that are added. There could be criteria that are eliminated. We'll just have to wait and see for that NOFO. We're expecting, similar to what happened in year 3, we're expecting planning and demonstration grants funding, as well as implementation, which is the construction. And in the bipartisan infrastructure law, year 4 and year 5. So year 4 is 2025 that we're in right now. Year 5 will be 2026. There's already over $1 billion appropriated. So the money is there. The legislation has passed. The legislature, Congress, is waiting on the USDOT to produce the NOFO and move forward with the funding that they've already authorized. What does an implementation project look like? I'm not going to read every word on the screen. Think of it as construction primarily, but also think of it as construction related to a defined safety outcome and a safety goal that was in your safety action plan. So the old grip style 2 to 4 widening, the new alignment project to connect 2 cul-de-sacs, maintenance and resurfacing. None of that is eligible for implementation. The guidance we've received from the federal government to this point is take something out of your adopted action plan and turn it into construction dollars that you put on the field. And then the last bullet on my slides basically explains how that would work. If your action plan saw that you have a spike and a higher than expected rate of left turns on a specific corridor, and you want to try and reduce that, then your grant proposal, your grant implementation request to Federal Highway could introduce and investigate access management, median construction, signal modifications directly on that corridor where you saw the data. And based on the guidance from the Federal Highway documents, the best practice for all of us, we know that there is a tool set that we have that will reduce those severe left turn crashes. More examples of the types of implementation projects that are eligible that Federal Highway has told us, submit one of these style projects and you'll get funding. The other category is supplementary planning and demonstration projects. So primarily for this, the big one is the safety action plan. If you have not done a safety action plan and you want to go after funding later, your first job is using the supplementary planning and demonstration projects to do your plan. It's 80-20 match. Again, that list of the governments that received planning money in year 1, 2, and 3, they're all doing their safety action plans. In addition to safety action plans, though, skipping past the first bullet on that screen, there is a list of additional things that Federal Highway has said, yes, if you ask for money under the supplementary planning and demonstration project category, and it's one of these bullets, we will review it positively and you will likely get funding. So road safety audits are another big one. Complementary safety planning, expanding on your safety action plan. Maybe there was in Milton's case, Milton actually adopted their safety action plan in 2022, which was significantly earlier than most other cities. There's always a chance that some hot and button issues, some change in the network, some change in land use has changed the conditions that you're looking at, and you want to study that. Supplementary planning, updating your safety action plan, recommended and will likely be funded. No engineering and no construction in supplementary planning and demonstration projects. The guidance we've received from Federal Highway there is stay in that, and for the engineers in the room, stay in that concept design level. Stay in the road safety audit. You haven't surveyed the corridor yet, you're not going into PE, but keep it concept level and below, and you likely won't run into the danger of Federal Highway calling it engineering effort, which is not eligible for reimbursement. Milton's safety action plan is on the right. We actually started this plan before the Big Safety for All safety action plan movement got underway. We were using a previous guidance from Federal Highway for countermeasures called the Local Road Safety Plan. So we had started that. Towards the end, we started getting the safety action plan guidance. We were pretty fortunate that many of the requirements for the safety action plan we were already doing. So we were able to call our local road safety plan the safety action plan for the city of Milton. It didn't have to do it over. Byron already covered this. In order for your safety action plan to count as the plan to pursue implementation dollars, those 3 lines in red on the screen are required. You have to do this if you expect Federal Highway to acknowledge your plan. The other 6 are optional. You have to basically address 4 of those other 6. Every city is a little bit different. Some cities, the equity considerations are the top. Some cities, the equity considerations are not at the top. What we've been talking with other cities and counties around us is to try and figure out of those 6 optional ones, which make the most sense and which is the better fit for you and your residents. Milton's local road safety plan, divided into the 6 categories you see at the top of the screen, along with the 2 notes at the bottom. The elements at the top of the screen won't be much of a surprise to many of you in the room. But what's unique about Milton is we've got a network of public gravel roads. When I say gravel roads, I mean dirt roads, but we call them gravel roads. They're actually a resource for our residents to use as a sidewalk. There are a couple of roads in Milton where you go out a nice summer day, spring day, weather's not cold. You'll see people walking in the road and they're using it as almost a park, as a way to get to their neighbor for dinner or something along that road. So we have interaction between users of the gravel roads, pedestrians and horseback, believe it or not, along with the interaction it's still a public road, it's still a dirt road. Every once in a while you will see a car using it. But the interaction between those elements was difficult for us to manage and turn into countermeasures to improve safety. Milton also, again, unique. A portion of our city, the focus is those gravel roads, but then another focus of the city that's part of our network, part of our asks from our residents are PTVs. So we have some subdivisions that are actively using golf carts to get back and forth between the subdivision on those local 25-mile-an-hour roads and less. We actually also have a couple of subdivisions near City Hall that are close enough to the schools, elementary school, middle school, that the parents are using the golf carts to drop the kid off. Maybe not necessarily right at the school, across the street, so that they're able to use the crosswalk to get to the school. We have multiple subdivisions that have a relatively high percentage of licensed golf carts, and we've actually, it's pleasantly surprising. We actually have a couple of subdivisions that have approached the city that are wanting us to put signs up to warn drivers that they expect to see golf carts being used. We're nowhere near Peachtree City, but we are definitely heading in that direction with seeing more of those on the roads. I'm not going to go into huge detail on this. You'll see that we split our local road safety plan into 3 areas: education, engineering, and enforcement. And for each of those emphasis areas, we tried to come up with as many as we could to check each of those boxes on that matrix. The 6 emphasis areas on the left and the 3 kind of overarching areas on the top row. So for enforcement, we were very lucky to have a strong level of support from our police chief and our public safety folks. Similar to, I believe it was Sandy Springs, the discussion in Milton on the enforcement end is we don't have enough bodies. We have a team of 4 that do traffic enforcement for the entire city. It's nowhere near what we have in other cities, other counties, but it's an improvement on what Fulton County was doing for us pre-incorporation. So we're limited by resources, but we do have a strong chief who is able to, a strong chief and some social media components to the police as well that help us to try and push out the message, whether it's hands-free and distracted drivers, whether it's Alive at 25 and kind of the student child end of it. Tips about bike safety, tips about roundabouts. Again, strong coordination with our police friends. We've used variable message signs you see on the left. We've tried to spread the word whenever we're in the rut. If any of you know what that is and you're deer hunters, there is a period of the year, every single year, early to mid-November, where if you have deer in your city and you're seeing a crash, expect to see an uptick in that first 3-week kind of end of October, beginning in November period. We see it every single year. It's something to do with, I believe, the mating season with the deer, and they're just more present and more visible running across our roads, just causing some trouble for us on the engineering side. We also put up some state law 3-foot minimum signs along our, I don't want to call it heavily traveled because we're nowhere near what you would think is heavily traveled in Roswell, Alpharetta, but it's heavily traveled for Milton, North-South Road, Freemanville Road. If any of you are familiar with it, that's where we would typically, if we have bikes in groups, that's typically where they're going to be. On the engineering side, we've had some good luck, and I wanted to share this with the group. Byron gave you the message of slow speeds and slowing people down. Milton couldn't agree more. I've got speed studies that we're looking at. We're working subdivisions where I don't remember it being this crazy and this bad pre-COVID, but something happened and changed just during the pandemic. I've got cars going 60 miles an hour in a subdivision. I've got cars going 90 miles an hour on Hopewell and Freemanville and some of our relatively low volume, not congested 2-lane roads. And of course, we always hear the 100+ story on 400 and interstates. I wish there was a way for us to, as local governments, take a little bit more ownership over our roads that we maintain, that we're responsible for, and don't have to, per state law, ask the state for permission to reduce the speed limit to try and get people to slow down. We have had some success with District 7. We have tried to not overwhelm them and give them a list of 50 roads that we'd try to reduce. We've been doing it in batches of 3 or 4 at a time, and I'll give them credit. Their process is slow. There are multiple approval steps, but so far to date, we've had 100% success. We've asked for 3 speed limit reductions on 3 off-system local roads. We presented the case. We hired an engineer. We went through US limits. We gave as much support for lowering this as we possibly could, and all 3 were approved. We had another success last year where we tried 4 more, and all 4 of those were approved. So we're trying our best to not be greedy, but try to where we have a strong either data reason or engineering reason to ask for a speed limit reduction and working through that process with the state. A couple of other pictures of recommendations from the local road safety plan out of the engineering category. So now we're getting to politics. Past next couple of slides. Sometimes some for you, especially the younger folks in the room, paying attention to politics and following what's going on in DC is admittedly very difficult. But it's important for you, and if the message from me today is to realize that things that are happening in DC are directly affecting all of you in this room. And I will give you a couple of examples of that. Obviously, the NOFO for year 4 for safe streets is going to be a big deal. We're going to want to see what changes. We recognize that year 4 is going to be significantly different than year 2 and year 3. Who's on your grant writing team? Is anyone else besides me and council member, city or county staff in the room? Most of you are probably consultants. Okay, we've got a couple. Awesome. When you're writing a grant, the engineers shouldn't be writing the grant. The engineers absolutely should be providing the data that the grant needs and the technical analysis. But again, my strong recommendation, when you're submitting a grant, think of it as a proposal, think of it as marketing. You typically don't have the engineers writing the grant. You have the communications and the journalists writing the grant to give that information in plain English, easily understood, and not as technical as something the engineers would produce. Where's your match is an important step of the grant. Those of you who are working for cities and counties with a SPLOST, the match is easy. Those of you who don't have a SPLOST, the match is extremely difficult, and that will sometimes be the swear of whether you pursue some of the funding or not. We've talked about implementation and planning and demonstration grants and the different types. Implementation is competitive, very competitive, but you're also asking for significantly more money than planning and demonstration. Planning and demonstration could be a couple of $100,000. Implementation could be $20 to $30 million. The last 2 bullets is where I wanted to get into politics a little bit. So one of the big fights right now, if you follow Trump and the White House and the USDOT new secretary, one of the largest fights that's going on in the federal government right now is, does the executive branch have the ability to choose which legislation and which funding previously approved by Congress that they actually want to implement? This was actually goes back before I was born, when Nixon was in office. They were having the same types of problems with where is that check and balance, and does the executive branch have to implement what Congress passes, or do they get to pick and choose based on primarily politics, which of those bills they push and which bills they just simply ignore? They passed the Impoundment Control Act of 1974, and that's, nobody in this room is going to know what that is, but it establishes a process, a formal process that requires another vote of Congress to withdraw or rescind or change previously already authorized funding. And it describes basically how that works. The issue right now with Trump in the White House is they don't think they need to go through that step. They believe through Office of Management and Budget that they're trying to be a strong executive group, and they believe they have the power to choose which grants and which programs that have already been authorized and passed by law ultimately get funded. I want to read you a couple of things that I jotted down that didn't get into my notes. About a month ago, January 27th. January 27th was an extremely stressful day for anyone in city and county government that works with any kind of federal funding, whether it's Safe Streets, whether it's something coming through housing and urban development. January 27th, a memo came out from the government requiring all federal agencies to temporarily pause all activities related to disbursement for federal financial assistance and other relevant agency activities. Some of you in the room will know how big of a deal that is. I can't stress enough. We immediately started talking to our other surrounding jurisdictions because a memo like that and guidance like that is way beyond transportation and safe streets for all. There are billions of dollars every day that are dispersed from the federal government through grants that if they're taking the action of temporarily pausing all of them, it is a significantly big deal, to the point where the very next day, January 28th, there was a temporary restraining order passed by a federal judge, basically basically telling us to ignore that memo for now. And then the very next day, the Wednesday afterwards, Trump, the White House Office of Management Budget, issued another statement. And I'm paraphrasing this, I know, to simplify it, but never mind, we're rescinding the other memo. Don't worry, just keep moving. Something like that, in the end, it ended well. But something like that creates so much uncertainty and questions for those of us on the local government side, those of us on the consultant side who are working on these projects. We literally, that week before, 27th and 28th, 29th, that was a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. The very next Monday, I was awarding at my council $1 million contract on a federal grant that was 80/20. And we were talking all week about, should we go through with this? What's the likelihood of us spending our money and then 3 months later going to federal highway and there's responses could be, oh, we're not going to reimburse you. We don't support those initiatives anymore. Ultimately, we move forward. Ultimately, we're taking the strategy and the mindset of we have a executed grant agreement. We would hope that that would be honored and that would be enough security that we are able to get on our project from beginning to end. But we simply don't know. We're going to push forward. We're going to, believe it or not, a portion of that grant is a plan, a different style plan that is required literally by the federal government to look at disabilities and accessibility. So the idea that one side of the federal government is saying, you have to do this, and the other side of the federal government says, well, you can't use federal money to do this. It's difficult for those of us on the local side to try and figure out what's going to be changing. Last slide for me. If any of you have perused this is a phenomenally amazing database through ARC's website that is searchable, filterable, updated all the time. Great resource for cities and counties, helpful for consultants as well. to see the status of certain grant programs, what's already, where has the NOFO came out, when is the deadline, are there grant programs that are expected that we're going to be hearing over the next 2 or 3 months? Those are on this program. If you want to see old data from previous awards, all of those programs are in a great searchable, filterable database. It's extremely powerful. And we're going to do questions now. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Rob. I did hear the story about parents dropping their kids on Gold Card, but I didn't know it was City of Milton that was happening on City of Milton. So that concludes our presentation. Now we would love to hear from you. The floor is open for questions, so feel free to raise your hand.
To highlight for people that may be picking up implementation projects or things that you would like the design teams to keep in mind, informed by the planning process? From all three of you, yeah, sure.
Yes, as I mentioned a little bit, so to repeat the question for engineering consultants, do we have thoughts or suggestions, lessons coming out of the safety action plan for kind of how to hand off into
The
implementation side? So we have, I've worked on about a dozen of these plans nationally, 3 here in Georgia, and several others in other states, but giant regional plans, it's very small little city plans. But we've kind of gotten a different answer from clients, depending on what they're looking for and what they're trying to accomplish out of their safety action plan. We don't have time today, but I'll be here for the rest of the day if anybody wants to hear the background on where SS4A came from, the kind of interesting, like, national advocacy push to USDOT during the Obama and first Trump administration. We haven't talked about the source of it, but it really was a lot of local cities, as Rob mentioned. It's one of the very few programs that USDOT gives money straight to cities and bypasses the states, although Georgia and GDOT's always a partner, so collaborators. So long way of saying that it's interesting and it's very much up to cities on what they're trying to accomplish. Some cities that we've worked with do want a very comprehensive, they want all of their safety problems kind of identified and at least pins put on the map and maybe a suggestion made about kind of what direction that would go. I think more cities we've worked with have not wanted that. They have wanted to line up thinking about SS4A, as Rob mentioned, the first year or two kind of supporting safety action plans. They want to line up for the implementation money. So they're kind of like, tell us what project's going to win and maybe 2 or 3 below that. So more typically we've worked with kind of our like top 10 locations or top 5 locations, aiming for a project that we can align with the next round of SS4A NOFO implementation grant. It's going to set them up for success. For every city that it works a little bit differently. For some, it's very much targeted at vulnerable populations, whether that be equity, ethnicity, nation of origin, whether that be equity, modal equity from a vulnerable road user perspective, and trying to address overrepresented crash types outside of automobiles. That has varied a little bit. I think I'm really bummed that I can't preview this to y'all because we do have the Decatur projects that are in the works right now. The city staff haven't even seen them yet, so we didn't want to share them. But for them, we took a little bit of a hybrid approach and we said we're going to pick Decatur's just really wrestling with state routes 8, 10, and 155 being overrepresented on all their vehicles, so you've seen their crashes. They have GDOT has the projects programmed on State Route 10, cycle track continuation of Avondale road diet into Decatur, which I'm very excited about. Something very cool. We might notice that corner of the city. And then they got a raised ramp to look at State Route 8 Scott Boulevard, which is going to kick off next year. So they said 10 and 8 are kind of covered. They didn't have anything programmed on 155. So they said, can you please do a deeper dive into State Route 155, Claremont, Commerce, and give us some suggestions on that. Decatur can't do much with it, but they do want to be teed up for a future conversation with GDOT. Then collaboratively, Decatur said, then let's grab 3 city streets that are representative of what we see on the high risk network, and do some deeper project development into kind of a typological approach to say what a typical neighborhood street, what a typical downtown urban core business center street would look like. So we're doing project development on those three with the anticipation that they will probably never go for a federal grant match. But they were ones, the city was kind of, they have a little bit of funding teed up for, in the next year or two. And the city staff just wanted a very light design guide to talk about common treatments. They're going to use some of those types of streets. Dunwoody was, just a little bit different where they said, so Dunwoody was a locally funded safety action plan. It was not through SS4A, but it was aligned, as Rob kind of mentioned, they started it and then very quickly lined it up with the SS4A program, midstream. And Dunwoody said the opposite. They said, we want 3 big projects that we can start working on. So kind of get us moving on those 3. So we did a little bit of, we dive into the high injury intersections. And like that. So I think it depends on everything a little bit. And I'll say, as I'm passing this over to Rob, Dunwoody read Milton's plan and said, when we were working on, they said, do a plan that's kind of like Milton's plan. And then when Decatur got their award, they reached out to their on-call who also works at the city of Dunwoody and said, can you review ours? So these are all, there's a little family tree that involved these somewhat.
I would put from Milton's end, we looked at the overlap between what did we know was already an issue? What's the hot button topic? What are the council members concerned about? And looked for an overlap of that against what was going on in the local city plan. And on the engineering side, that immediately went to slowing cars down and going lower speeds. We actually, the contract that I referenced about a month ago that we awarded at council was supplementary planning and demonstration projects that we identified 3 things coming out of our local road safety plan. Again, looking for what federal highway is telling us will receive the funding and comparing that against what we know are the hot button topics for our city, our residents, our elected officials. So 3 parts of that implementation plan. First was an ADA transition plan that was specifically called out on the webpage. This is eligible. This is the type of plan you should be using this money on. So we were able to federally fund our ADA transition plan, along with doing some traffic calming pilots and some countermeasures at some of 2 of our single lane roundabouts. And then the 3rd directly came from the local road safety plan. If you're familiar with Milton, Milton has 3 primary north-south routes going paralleling, 2 of them paralleling State Route 372. So 372 is kind of on the western side of the city. We have Freeman Bowl Road going north-south, kind of in the middle of the city. Then we have Football Road going north-south on the eastern end. The remainder of our implementation was looking at road safety audits and concepts on Freeman Bowl.
The speed limit doesn't change the design of speed, but in my experience, I feel like maybe some of the municipalities are like resistant, or maybe just their constituents are resistant to the traffic calming measures that would actually achieve those reductions. So on the planning and policy side, are there like conversations about really crazy things like chicanes and stuff that would actually slow people down?
So I will preview the Decatur Safety Action Plan that goes before the commission in April. Decatur is, I think you said you were not being greedy and trying to trickle out speed reductions. Decatur's asking for all of them. Decatur's asking for a citywide 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. And it's going to press District 7 for a bunch of rules really quickly. That would only apply to local streets. It would not apply to State Routes 810 or 155. But their goal is to ultimately get each of those under 35 miles an hour speed, so close to 30 or 35. It is hard. We'll talk about it for the rest of the afternoon. Changes in the run sign, even the gigantic sign that we saw in our road safety audit, it's like 8 feet tall or something like that. Matters a little bit, and that's important because some people, it's important in all these safety conversations to think about the margins. There's no silver bullet. So if some people are going to just be rule followers and to bring a few things down, it's probably worthwhile. It's not going to make a dramatic input. It's probably not worth, I mean, it is worth pursuing, but you have to get into, road design, context-specific road design, and say, if we're gonna design a road that we want, the traffic at the speed we want to do it. It's one reason why I'm really big on focus toolkits, to get citizens used to chicanes, getting citizens used to daylighting, getting citizens used to, this is the way that our city designed street. We had a whole conversation about, y'all wanted safer routes to school, y'all wanted kids to be able to walk back to school, y'all wanted people to not stop speeding through your neighborhood. This is how we're doing that, and trying to get that political conversation going with residents and constituents. A lot of these conversations are very old, none of them are new, a lot of them are very new, because we're kind of having them as this framework the past year or two, so we'll continue to see, but, our point is really that, like, yes, you should pursue lower consistent speed limits. You should also be doing that in conjunction with a really robust traffic calming program. And I'll turn it over to Rob. I would encourage everybody to look at Athens Clarke County and Bacon-Bibb County. Both have adopted new traffic calming policies this year that use streetlight and big data predictive numbers to pursue the highest percentage traffic speeds over the posted speed limit and program projects proactively. And they both are working through council on funding sources for that. Athens has their $1 million a year program in place. Bacon-Bibb is voting on it later this year. So interesting ways of looking at proactive traffic calming, not just being responsive to citizen conditions.
I'll try to be quick. This is a super hot topic for any of us in local government. Will reducing a speed limit from 40 to 35 get drivers to drive 5 miles slower? Probably not. Everybody in the room recognizes that. Everybody in the room recognizes that drivers will usually drive the speed that it feels comfortable, depending on what we're going to, depending on our origin and how urgent it is to get there that day. They're going to drive likely 5 to 10 to 15 over posted speed, because something on the road is contributing to that comfort level. From the enforcement side, dropping that speed limit from 40 to 35. The benefit, will we see a drop in average speed? Yes. Will it be 5 miles an hour? No. But it will allow our public safety counterparts to write speeding tickets up to a lower amount. So some of you probably know this in the room. I say this a lot in my presentations. State law, believe it or not, local law enforcement, so cities and county police, unlike the state patrol, state law, city and county police cannot use radar to give you a speeding ticket for less than 10 above posted speed. That is why, from the local perspective, we wish we had control of our speed limits over roads. Unfortunately, due to past history, there's a little town called Ludwig back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that contributed to a lot of bad things that put us all into the situation where we need to get state approval for our radar permits. But from a local perspective, our toolbox is limited. In looking at countermeasures, traffic calming chicanes, looking at measures like that can take months, if not years, to design, acquire land and build. If we know we will get a 1 to 2 to 3 mile an hour average speed reduction by taking a sign from 40 to 35, we're going to do it. Byron, I know City of Atlanta might have been successful doing the 25 on all the city limits. We're going to be following Decatur pretty closely. So if you're successful, we'll probably be the next one.
Action isn't specifically one of the recommendations in the Sandy Springs Safety Action Plan. Probably the biggest concern for speeding is Roswell Road, which is essentially a 5-lane cross section. But I think the city recognizes that until some of those design features go in, people are not going to, go 35 or 40, whatever, rather than 45 or above. So a little frustrating in some ways, because there are definitely some areas in the northern part of Sandy Springs where you do have a wide open Roswell Road and people literally just crossing all the time, and it's a pretty dangerous situation. But for that reason, they are trying to prioritize getting that median in, getting the sidewalks in, and then hopefully, once those design features go in and kind of calm traffic, then they can look at reducing speed limits perhaps in those areas.
If you have another question, the presenters will be better if you should ask them. Just a reminder, if you have not checked out of your hotel, the checkout time is 11. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. We've met a while. We didn't know this.